I think the end goal here is really that Meta wants to create this kind of frictionless, language agnostic metaverse. And welcome everyone to Slater Pod. Hi, Esther.
Hi, Florian.
One of the very final episodes of the year, definitely the final news episode of the year. We're going to get probably another great guest episode coming up. But yeah, again, last news episode of the year. A lot happened. We're going to run you through every story that happened in 2023. No, just kidding. We're going to talk about the last few weeks. I think we've been offline for about 3 weeks. So on the agenda today is the battle for speech translation, which is emerging as a key battleground among the big tech companies in language AI. Then you're going to tell us a lot about M&A. There's been a few transactions among language service and technology providers since we last spoke. And then we're going to talk about a few other things: Paris Olympics, EU Parliament, US Homeland Security, very big contract they're renewing. But first, as the year is closing, we still have a ton of exciting research for you. So for example, just out is our very latest pro guide, Solution Sales for LSPs, because, most of the very attractive clients out there are large and tend to require a fairly complex sales process, sales cycle. We did speak a little bit about a different part there in the scaling an LSP account report that we had on a prior that we published about 6-7 weeks ago. But this is more kind of pre-sales. How do you make sure that you understand your client's needs and then kind of do pre-sales discovery? Set up the program when you want it, and then do some post-implementation care. Were you involved in your prior role? Were you involved at all in the sales process, kind of pre-sales discovery, or not much? Only when it's kind of rolled in a little bit?
Yeah, when it was more sort of solution selling, I suppose. The salespeople like to have an operational person there as part of it. Yeah.
They show, hey, there's actual people other than the salespeople that are part of this.
Trying to validate the fact that you're not one lonely salesperson in a otherwise unstaffed office. There are actual people who will be there to pick up the phones and do the work. And
100%. One of my strongest ones, and I'm sure this changed over the years, but one of my strongest ones was actually bringing translators to the meeting, like senior linguists, and just say, here's the lead linguist who's going to be taking care of your account. So that used to be a very strong kind of pre-sales tool, arrow in my sales quiver. Yeah, so I mean, again, that report's great. It's almost 50 pages, 45 pages, pre-sales discovery. We got chapters like assessing the buyer setup, profiling the buyer, checking their localization maturity. Then we got a great, like a one-page checklist. So if you have salespeople, you can give them that checklist. They can go out. It's very, very handy. Overcoming objections, etc. So yeah, very, very great piece of research there that from our senior research analyst, Alex Edwards. Actually, I counted, we're up to 7 pieces of research reports this year. We got solution sales, scaling the LSP key account, translation AI, subtitling captioning, market report, game localization report, M&A report. That was all this year. And actually, there's 2 more to come. One is on interpreting end AI coming in a couple of days. So by the time you listen to this podcast, you might be able to buy it. And then there's another one which is coming out before the end of the year. So, go and get those reports. Remember that you can actually get all of these reports by being a pro or enterprise subscriber. Now, what's the difference between pro and enterprise? One is pro is you have a single logon, but if you have a company, and many of our listeners have companies, right? And you oversee a team, you should get enterprise, because enterprise allows you to invite your colleagues, right? So you have a master account, and then you can invite your colleagues, and you have seats, right? So you have 5, 10, 15, 20 seats. It's very popular with our technology accounts.
Different people might have different areas of interest as well, so they can download and access what's interesting to them in particular.
Yeah, exactly. And they can also access the paywall content, right? Not just the PDFs that you can download, but the paywall content. It's actually very popular with big tech companies that are reading our content. All right, speaking of big tech, so there has been a bit of news flow coming from big technology companies, language AI companies in general. So we ran this story headlined OpenAI gains traction as new default for machine translation, carefully hatched, right? Gains traction as a potential new default for MT. After we came across a piece of news that a customer communication platform called MessagePoint launched their new content hub, saying that it can translate text into 80 languages and that customers can use either DeepL, no surprise, or OpenAI, right? That's a bit of a surprise. So you have a core language tech company like DeepL now being kind of put against OpenAI for machine translation, not for any of these other things that these LLMs can do, but for machine translation. And that was like a day or two before this whole crazy OpenAI saga kicked off. Now, how much did you hear about this, like on your end?
The firing, rehiring was pretty much all over the news. The local BBC news that was going out to everybody. So yeah, it was definitely a point of interest over here.
Imagine, I mean, this went full mainstream news. I mean, my Twitter feed was basically 80%, Sam Altman and Ilya Sutskever and all these other characters in that saga. So I don't want to rehash the whole thing. I mean, suffice it to say that there was a board. The board fired Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. Part of that board and a co-founder and chief scientist at OpenAI is a gentleman called Ilya Sutskever. And that, initially supported the firing of Sam Altman, then they retracted it. Since then, Altman and Sutskever are back there and they're tweeting out heart emojis. Like there's a lot of heart emojis and hugging and selfies and things like that going on. But again, that happened just like a couple of days after we published that article. And so, initially I was like, well, is this company going to completely disintegrate? Because everybody threatened to go over to Microsoft, but then they didn't. And now they're back and they might still be the new default for machine translation if they get their act together. Now, let me bring this full circle to another story we published, which was headlined, "The Surprising Reason Why Europe Denied Google's Machine Translation Patent." And guess who was on the list of people who tried to patent something called neural machine translation systems with rare word processing back in 2015 in Europe? That was a gentleman called Ilya Sutskever, who is the co-founder and chief scientist who was at the heart of the OpenAI saga we just talked about. So that guy already pops up in a lot of translation and language AI related news. So again, now point being, Google tried to patent what essentially seems to be like basic neural MT back in late 2015 when it all came out, right? And as it happens in patent land, these things take forever to wind their way through the approval process, apparently, especially if they're not being granted quickly. And so, yeah, it took them only 8 years to deny Google's patent. It's interesting. They said that it doesn't represent a technical or an inventive step. And let me try to pull this up. So, yeah, they said something, it's kind of more linguistics and not technical, which I'm like, all right, that's one way to look at it. I mean, but if you take this to its logical conclusion, kind of anything LLM would be not an inventive step and just linguistics, right? Next word prediction, etc. So, I mean, it feels a bit dated, a patent from 2015, of course, but, they only finally denied it now in late 2023. So
because there were some appeals, weren't there? I think there was along the way.
Yeah, a lot of appeals. And yeah, but also again, it goes to show that machine translation really is kind of a core origin technology for LLMs, right? Because again, like even the guy who was part of that patent, Ilya Sutskever, was at the time 8 years ago was actually working on machine translation, right? And then moved on to this OpenAI $100 billion startup. Now, let's go full on Q4 2023, where really speech translation seems to be what everybody is chasing, everybody being those big technology companies. And again, I mean, having these companies pour all these resources into, this technology, of course, has an implication for LSPs and anybody involved in the ecosystem. So just quickly rattle this down. So Google launched Translatotron 3. I love that term, Translatotron, right? It makes me think of a dinosaur, and I'm not sure why.
It's the Tron.
It's a Tron, but not a robot. It kind of makes me think of a dinosaur, and I'm not really sure why.
Or transponders. What were they called? Like the transponders. Megatron. Transformers.
Transformers. Yeah, you're right. The Transformer.
Not the Transformer models, but the Transformer robots.
The robots that save the world. Yes. So, well, okay. It's a mix between a transformer, a dinosaur, and a robot. Anyway, but actually in this case, it's a fully unsupervised end-to-end model for direct speech translation. That's Translatotron 3, launched by Google, out there now. Now you're thinking, well, that's great. There is one speech-to-speech translation model, right? Google turns around and launches Gemini, which is a much, much bigger model. It's kind of like Google's GPT-4 equivalent, right? They put out a bunch of benchmarks, and I'm not going to bore you with whatever's not relevant for the language industry, because there's all kinds of tasks that Google Gemini model does. But there's also one that they tested in. There's, for some reason, well, they categorized it under audio, and they tested it, Gemini, on automatic speech translation, which brings us back to Translatotron. So I'm not sure I want to unpack that, but like basically Google's saying, well, our new GPT-4 type answer to OpenAI can also do automatic speech translation. And we tested it against GPT-4, and apparently it scores better. They used BlowScore, which we all know is fundamentally flawed in 2023. You can go back to our coverage and check it out. Long story short, Google launches all of these speech translation things and launches its answer to ChatGPT and tests it on automatic speech translation and says it's outperforming OpenAI ChatGPT or GPT-4. Let's put a pin in that. Now, if you're thinking that's a lot on speech translation, there's more. Meta, Facebook, Meta, claimed they made speech translation a whole lot better, and they launched something called Seamless. Did you watch this demo? They keep tweeting it out. They have all these demos online. Did you watch any of them?
Yeah, I've seen a bit of it. Yeah.
This thing, Seamless, translates speech in real time. I think they have like a 2-second latency. And the kicker, according to Meta, is that it maintains a similar vocal style. So if you whisper, the thing's also gonna whisper, right? And if you shout, or if you're emotional, etc., it's supposed to kind of reflect the way you you feed it, like the way you speak. It's also then its translation output is going to be similar. Now, Seema had a great ending to our coverage of this. So basically, we think that the end goal of all this, and it's open sourced, by the way, this Seamless, so anybody can download it and build on it, right? Now, I think the end goal here is really that, Meta wants to create this kind of frictionless, language agnostic metaverse. So if you and I, meet in the metaverse, and, I speak Spanish, you speak English, it doesn't matter. We can just kind of seamlessly communicate. What do you think about that? Is that going to happen in the next 5 years? Is anybody going to meet up in the metaverse in a language agnostic way?
I still think language agnosticism is quite far off. Like truly agnostic, just because of all the cultural, like if it's not language, then we'll find another reason to to not have seamless communication.
I think this is such a deep question. I mean, even if it's actually going to be super interesting, once you get the technology So you're up to like 95% language accuracy. I mean, there's so many other things that would make a conversation not work. I mean, even and frankly, I mean, I will be corrected, I guess, in the next 2 or 3 years if this actually does end up working. But there's so many other aspects like stop, go, incomplete sentences. Just, my stuttering just a second ago. I mean, how are you going to translate that or make it seamless in the target?
You need Descript automatically remove it. The ums and ahs, first of all.
You're right. But then you're going to shorten it.
Yeah, it's a lot of layering, I think, of... Yeah, language or pure translation is one aspect, but there's a lot of layering or layers of interpretation and understanding that need to happen for that to truly be seamless. But I suppose it could become more seamless or less friction, more frictionless than it is currently.
Maybe it works for like business calls or something in like a highly in a very structured setting where both parties, understand, well, this is being live speech translated, and, make sure that you speak slowly and don't, do anything that's going to throw them off.
There might be new modes of operating, so new working procedures to try and work with this in the same way that you have re-speaking for the live captioning. It'll be an art to try and help the output.
And now if you're an LSP, you should probably go and play around with this. You can download this, right? This is there. It's open source. Maybe there's something you can build for your clients. Maybe there's some way for you to include a human expert in the loop component here. I don't know. I would try it. I would check it out. I would offer it to my clients, and someone, if I don't do it, somebody else is going to do it. So it's there. It probably takes some tech savvy. I mean, take some developer resources, probably not massively, I would assume, right? I mean, some of this stuff is low to no code. Anyway, Meta, seamless. Now, an important component, and then we're going to move on from this technology discussion, but one important component is, of course, speech to text. And then AWS, so Amazon Web Services, they launched a new Transcribe foundation model trained on millions of hours of audio. And, it takes $5, $10, $20 million to train one of these models from scratch, right? It's and this is kind of a baseline foundation model that people can now use. Again, I'm not sure if this is open source, so you probably need to be a subscriber to Amazon Web Services, right? But you can build on top of it. And again, something that if you're an LSP, you might want to consider using and offering to your clients. I wonder how competitive this is as a standalone, because you can use Whisper, right? Whisper is you can, that's open source. You can use it. So probably it's this Amazon Transcribe thing is more relevant for people who are very much embedded in the Amazon, kind of in the AWS technology stack and have other things running there. And so they can use that now, right? And it's probably the best blog that I've seen out there, the Amazon Transcribe/Translate blog. There's lots of good how-tos if you want to build solutions for clients. So new Transcribe foundation model, probably pretty good. And go check it out. All right, let's move over to the M&A corner, because we've had a number of interesting mergers and acquisitions among language service providers. One was pretty big, right? That was in the US healthcare interpreting space. Tell us more.
Let's say one is pretty big because it's not closed yet. So this is Cloudbreak Health. Its core offering is a VRI solution. So it's focused on allowing limited English proficient patients to communicate within healthcare settings. So this is a VRI solution that's owned by a listed provider of digital healthcare solutions. So one of these sort of big companies listed in the US called UpHealth, that does a number of different things, including being the owner of Cloudbreak Health. So Cloudbreak Health is to be sold, was the headline, for $180 million. So it's supposed to be closing, I think they said in early 2024, or at least Q1 2024. And the buyer is a private equity firm, GTCR, that's going to acquire Cloudbreak for $180 million, like I said, in cash. It's pending regulatory approvals, etc. Cloudbreak was actually originally acquired itself by UpHealth, its current owner, in 2020, and we have coverage from back then as well. There was a SPAC and various other instruments that were used for its acquisition, but essentially UpHealth paid $142 million for Cloudbreak Health at the time.
You know what? I'm just looking up their stock ticker, and I mean, we didn't follow this, but they're down like 99.8%. So I wonder what's going on there, that, their market cap is $5 million. So if they sell something for 180,
I think they were talking about the rationale for a sale, saying, this is in the press release, saying UpHealth will receive significant liquidity to substantially reduce its existing debt and drive the business forward with a much healthier capital structure.
Fire sale.
I smell a fire sale.
There's a fire sale. Well, if they need, receive significant liquidity, substantially reduces existing debt. All right, so you're over indebted and you're selling something for 180 million, and you continue to be in business, because otherwise you probably wouldn't be. So, hey, the crown jewel is your VRI.
I think that's the thing. That's the parent company that's essentially in trouble, where Cloudbreak Health itself seems to have quite a lot of potential as a standalone business. So for Cloudbreak, they reported revenues of 34 million in the first half, so that's 6 months. 34 million, and profit of nearly $19 million US dollars. So it seems to have been going well in that part of the business, at least, but probably a little bit outside of, probably reasonably easy to carve out.
Man, how convoluted can it get? So, how, usually it's somewhat straightforward. You look at it, it makes sense. But so a company that's traded for, that's down 99.5% on the stock market, is trading at $5 million, but then sells something for 180 million. I don't know. That's above our financial equity research analyst pay grade. Anyway, so they sold it. Good luck. Hope you get the liquidity and you can reduce your existing debt.
I would say in the meantime, after the fact, we'll of course continue to follow Cloudbreak Health as the business of interest, and probably will give up thinking too much about UpHealth, which will continue to do things other than interpreting as part of its core business.
All right, well, let's move on to more familiar shores. LSP buying another LSP. Tell us more.
A nice little trade sale, familiar trade sale. So Elan, Belgian-based LSP, might have heard about them quite a few times on the pod and also in our coverage over the year, because AVB Vertellingen is Elan's third acquisition of 2023. It's also its largest ever. The Dutch-based AVP is roughly 15 million in revenues. That's based on the 2022 LSPI. And it serves government business sectors in the Netherlands with a mix of translation and interpreting services. So rough majority interpreting, more so than translation. And Elan is now majority owned by a private equity firm itself, Andera Partners. That happened in 2022. So they've been doing a few things transactionally over 2023. So that was the news coming out of Elan.
And then we got TransPerfect going and buying Wordbee, one of the more familiar names of the industry, at TMS, right? So who did they buy it from? And can you tell us more about that deal?
Yeah, well, they bought it from, in total, 7 different sellers were listed in the documents, the filing documents that we saw. So it's a mix of different shareholders, but the most significant of those shareholders were Wordbee's chairman, so that's Jose Vega, and the company's CTO, Stefan Bomig, and Hita Media, which is the Hong Kong-based listed financial printing and document services company that listeners might remember invested in Wordbee originally in 2016, a total of €1 million.
That was in 2016?
I believe so, yeah.
And that's why we know some of the pricing information, right? Because they're publicly listed and they have to put all this out.
Exactly. Yeah. So you sort of know the different percentages that those shareholders held in the business, and some other details around, multiples, purchase price, and some of the terms of the deals around earnouts and things like that.
Interesting. TransPerfect would acquire that. I mean, they have a huge stack of kind of technology already. Project director being one of the core tech and all this stuff. And now they're acquiring Wordbee.
Not only Wordbee, but also its official training partner, Wordcraft. So it seems to have been some sort of package deal. It's a boutique German LSP that was acquired alongside that.
TransPerfect still buying. All right, staying with TMSs, let's talk about XTM buying Rigi. Rigi is a famous mountain in Switzerland, by the way.
Aha.
Yes, it's almost as famous as the one that we visited on our team meeting in October. Yeah. Anyway, Rigi. What's Rigi? What do they do?
I was going to say Rigi is also called Boxma IT BV, which maybe is not quite such a catchy name, but that is hence why it trades as Rigi. But yeah, this deal closed in November. Rigi is going to sort of complement the XTM TMS by providing dynamic visual previews for software applications. So it's sort of adding this visual component to software localization.
The WYSIWYG. So they're buying WYSIWYG. I get it now. All right. XTM buying WYSIWYG.
In a word, yes. So, yeah, I mean, they say that it helps reduce, as you would expect, the number of queries coming from translators, helps speed up development work as well. But yeah, I mean, XTM, as people will probably remember, it was acquired itself by investment firm K1 in 2021. K1, of course, then went on to acquire XTRF 6 months later. So, yeah, interesting acquisition happening in the software side of the language industry.
Then there's two very different sectors now. One is court reporting. Tell us more about that. So a court reporting company, they still do a ton of translation. And what was that about? That's in the US, right?
That's over in the US. Yep. So it's a court reporting company called Magna Legal Services. We've probably spoken about them before. They combined with this new acquisition, they're going to have something like 4,000 court reporters and 2,000 interpreters. So it's a sizable interpreting operation as part of this court reporting area of expertise. So it's the company they acquired this time is called Zenaris Reporting and Video. They've done also one other acquisition that we tracked at least this year in 2023 that was called City Record Services. And the company itself, Magna, took on private equity investment in late 2022. So hence all the spending.
Magna buying Zenaris. And then there is something in the boutique acquisition in the game localization. Is it gaming or is it iGaming? Or is it, what is this?
Well, so you've got All In Global, which game localization provider, then acquiring what they term iGaming localization company called Translation Royale. So this is a small acquisition that happened there. And yeah, I mean, lots of different geographies involved. So you've got the game localization, the All In Global, the buyer is based in Malta, and then you've got Translation Royale, which has got offices in Germany and I think is headquartered in Singapore. So expanding geographically.
Didn't they just have this EMNLP conference finish in Singapore?
That was in Singapore, wasn't it?
Remember? We went to the one in Brussels.
We did.
Fond memories. 2018.
5 years ago. Yeah. I wonder if we go again, will we be a bit more prepared for that side of the industry?
I will never be prepared for this with the posters. So yeah, for the listeners, it's EMNLP. It's the biggest natural language processing conference in the world. I think obviously by now it's all about language AI and large language models and things like that. And you have all these researchers and academics that stand in front of their posters, which is kind of like a short version of these 50, 60 page research papers, and presenting, and then people kind of walk around. So instead of booth like at like a trade show, you basically just wander between these posters. And if you're trying to network with like business cards and things like that,
it's all technical, isn't it, as well? So you actually just stand there and read the poster, and then 20 minutes later ask some questions, I suppose.
Yeah, and that was in Singapore on Sentosa Island. So yeah, kind of the one island off of Singapore, small island with the big resort. Now, okay, let's get 3 more quick stories in before we close for today. It's the last news pod for the year, so we might as well extend it to 45 minutes. One is that the European Parliament looks to hire something called intercultural and language professionals. So not translators, but intercultural and language professionals. Have you looked into this a bit more closely?
A little bit. I mean, it sounds like translators repackaged. Let's put it that way. So they say that the services, what the people will be responsible for is translating, localizing, adapting, transcreating, and revising different types of content in their mother tongue. So, I mean, to me, it sounds a lot like a translator.
This could be a trial balloon, and I'm speculating wildly here, but like that they're basically coming up with some new type of role that they're going to start using as opposed to translators, right? So, now we're going to hire intercultural and language professionals, which is a little more disruption prone than like calling them translators.
You mean less disruption prone?
Less disruption prone. You're right. Yeah, sorry. Because the term translator now is, I mean, it's coming under a lot of pressure because of all this AI stuff, right? So you want to make this future-proof. Interesting. Intercultural language professionals. But they only hire them for what? German, Croatian, Lithuanian, Hungarian, and Slovenian. Do we know why?
I do not know why. No. I'd need to know why. They'll be based in Luxembourg, which was my old home. Working for the European Parliament.
I wonder why you still need to be like physically based there, but you probably have to, huh?
It's not so bad.
It's not so bad. I wouldn't mind. Luxembourg's not so bad. You get to learn Luxembourgish. All right. Luxembourgish, definitely not one of the languages on the roster of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security when they're tendering out their RFP for $100 million. What else do we know about this big RFP?
Yeah, probably not requiring Luxembourgish, but you never know. So this is an RFP that's coming up from ICE.
What's ICE? Sorry.
Immigration and Control. What is it?
U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
I'm so used to just hearing it called ICE, like on the TV and what have you. But yes, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're going to release an RFP for language services at the end of this month, December. The contract is supposedly worth an estimated $100 million US. And it will be covering a 5-year period that ends in March 2029, if you can think that far ahead, meaning that the contract is likely to start... likely to go live in the second quarter of next year, 2024.
And some of these people will be based in Virginia, right? Where a lot of this type of contractors are.
Yeah, because part of the contract is to provide full-time staffing support on site, as you said, at the Technical Operations Center. But there's also, as always, by the sounds of it, a sort of a remote component. So doing things like monitoring, translation, transcription, interpreting, and analytic linguists intercept data analysis and interview support. So lots of different aspects here of language support, I suppose, in the true sense of the word. And I mean, crucially, I think for this particular contract, they're asking for LSPs to be able to deploy linguists quickly and increase staffing to meet time-sensitive requirements. So it's one of those fast-moving situations.
Yeah, they need to scale up in languages that they didn't have any coverage before. Closing on a story coming out of Paris, where we are all looking forward to the 2024 Olympics. And if you do not speak French, or you speak French as poorly as I do, you might need an app. And Paris spends, or is about to spend, or has spent 2 million euros on Full Circle speech-to-speech translation, a speech-to-speech translation app. Why did they do this? Why did they spend 2 million on a speech-to-speech translation app? Isn't that something that many people can just, what could this thing do?
As you said, setting the scene in preparation for the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So this is specifically the Paris Transportation Authority that has developed an app called Travidia. I can't even say it. Tradivia. I'm thinking Tradivia, which cost them 2 million euros. So apparently this I think is more to do with how it works. The app uses speech-to-speech translation utility that was designed by an accessibility company called Ava. Apparently, the app has been installed and tested on a number of tablets. So this is, picture a sort of metro or underground worker holding a tablet. And so it's been tested on a number of those. I guess similar to what you have in a healthcare setting, like in the US or elsewhere, where you're kind of wandering around with tablets that will help, except by the sounds of it, not connect you to remote interpreters, rather be able to do this automatic speech-to-speech translation. So it should be fully deployed ahead of the games, multilingual between French and 16 languages, and expected to be used by roughly 6,000 station agents to help, obviously, tourists and those who do not speak French.
You know what Interprefy's AI speech translation is called?
No.
It's called Avia. So this is a blend of Ava and Tradivia. So the middle is Avia. Making a connection where there is absolutely no connection. But I was like, because I was looking at Ava, I'm like, isn't Interprefy's AI speech translation called Ava? But no, it's Avia.
I think there's a link in the original article if you're keen to explore the company called Ava.
Ava. Huh. Well, good for them. They got 2 million for something that probably already exists in many other forms, and they retweaked it a little bit. And maybe they're using, Meta's Seamless. Who knows? All right. So thanks, everyone, for staying tuned for this long, extended news episode. We'll be back in the new year, and stay tuned for another one final great guest episode this year. See you soon.
Bye.